Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into something really critical, a proper, detailed look at life in the U.S. versus Canada.
Yeah, and we're going beyond the usual flags and, stereotypes.
Exactly. We're digging into the actual economics. Five big areas: taxes, cost of living, healthcare, immigration, and something often overlooked, transportation.
That's the goal. Forget the simple headlines for a minute. We all hear U.S. means higher wages, Canada means better benefits.
Right.
But when you pull together the real data tax studies, economic analyses, labor reports, it's way more complex. It's all about trade-offs, and sometimes those trade-offs have, well, pretty staggering results for people.
Okay, let's dive right in. Taxes.
Yeah.
The great equalizer, or maybe not so equal.
Yeah, maybe not. Both countries use progressive systems, right? So the more you earn, the higher the rate, and you get taxed federally and then again by the state or province.
So bottom line, which side of that border generally takes a bigger bite?
Generally speaking, Canada. The income tax rates tend to be higher, particularly once you get into those middle to high income levels.
Do we have like a concrete example?
We do. The sources looked at someone earning 60,000 US dollars. Okay. If that person lives in Ontario, their total income tax bill shakes out to about $12,614.
Okay, 12.6. And in the U.S., let's say California.
A similar person in California, they're looking at paying closer to $9,389.
Wow, that's what, over $3,200 difference right there?
It is.
Now, I know that some people are thinking, okay, that extra $3,200, that's my healthcare payment in Canada, so it's worth it. We should definitely circle back to that thought when we hit healthcare.
Absolutely. Put a pin in that. It's a fair point. But as we'll see, that higher Canadian tax isn't just about healthcare costs. And there's another layer, a real complication for one specific group.
Who's that?
U.S. citizens living in Canada. They get hit with this mandatory compliance with the U.S. tax system no matter where they live. It creates this administrative nightmare, honestly.
Nightmare how? What makes it so tough?
It's these reporting rules. You've got FBAR, that's Foreign Bank and Financial Accounts Reporting, and FACSIA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act.
Okay.
Basically, if you're a U.S. citizen, you have to report all your foreign bank accounts, your assets, if they cross certain thresholds. It leads to incredibly complex tax filings every year. Can be expensive, too, to get it done right.
So you're paying Canadian taxes and dealing with U.S. paperwork.
Exactly. And you have to actively claim something called the foreign tax credit. That's the mechanism to tell the IRS, hey, I already paid taxes on this income in Canada, so the U.S. doesn't tax you again on the same money. Double taxation is a real risk otherwise.
That sounds like a significant hidden cost, something you don't see advertised.
For sure. Canadians moving to Canada, they just don't have that whole extra layer of complexity.
All right, let's shift from income tax to building wealth.
Yeah.
How do they handle investment gains? Capital gains seem like a big point of difference.
Huge difference. In the U.S., it starts simple. 100% of your capital gain is taxable. But there's a major benefit for long-term gains.
Meaning you held the asset for?
Over a year. If you held it longer than a year, those gains get taxed at much lower preferential rates. Could be 0%, 15%, maybe 20%, depending on your overall income.
And Canada's approach?
Historically, Canada has been seen as, well, maybe more favorable here. Only 50% of your capital gain was included in your income to be taxed.
Only half. That sounds way better.
It was, but this is changing, and it's changing really soon. Anyone doing serious investing needs to know this. After June 25th, 2024, that 50% inclusion rate, it's jumping to 66.67% for any individual gains over $250,000 and for all corporate gains.
Whoa, from 50% to two-thirds inclusion. That closes the gap quite a bit, especially for bigger investors.
It really does. That historical advantage Canada had, it's shrinking fast.
Okay, major policy shift noted. Let's quickly touch on business taxes and sales tax before we move on. Corporate rates.
U.S. has a flat federal rate, 21%. Pretty straightforward. Canada's federal rate is a bit lower, 15% basic, but it can go down to just 9% for smaller businesses that qualify for the small business deduction.
So potentially quite attractive for small business owners in Canada.
Definitely can be.
And sales tax, what we pay at the till.
Big difference here. The U.S. has no federal sales tax. It's all state and local, and it varies wildly, from 0 in some states to like 10% in others.
Right.
Canada has the federal GST goods and services tax, and in many provinces, it's combined with the provincial tax into the HST harmonized sales tax.
And that HST rate can be?
Can be pretty high, often 13%, sometimes up to 15%, depending on the province. So consumers generally face a higher sales tax burden in Canada.
Got it. Okay, one last tax piece.
Yeah.
What happens when you pass away? Estate taxes.
The U.S. is known for its federal estate tax, right? Can be up to 40%, but only kicks in above really high exemption levels. Most people don't actually pay it.
In Canada, no estate tax.
No formal estate tax, no inheritance tax, but they have something called deemed disposition.
Deemed disposition sounds ominous.
It kind of means that when you die, the government treats your assets, like stocks, property, whatever, as if you sold them at their fair market value right at that moment.
So it triggers capital gains tax.
Exactly. All those capital gains we just talked about, they become due. So it's not a separate estate tax, but it is a tax hit based on the growth of your assets payable upon death, like a deferred income tax.
Okay, so we've painted a picture. Taxes generally heavier in Canada, more complex for U.S. expats, and changes coming to capital gains. Now, the big question, is that higher tax burden offset by a lower cost of living?
That is the million-dollar or maybe loony question, isn't it? On a really broad macro level, some estimates suggest living in the U.S. might be, say, 10% more expensive overall than Canada.
Okay, 10% cheaper in Canada sounds good.
Yeah, but that average figure is super misleading. Location is everything. If you start comparing major cities, the differences are huge.
Like what?
Well, take living expenses, and this is before rent, just daily life stuff. New York City, over 40% more expensive than Vancouver. San Francisco, also over 40% pricier than Ottawa.
40%. That sounds like a clear win for Canadian cities then. Cheaper daily life.
It seems that way, but here's the rub. The salary difference. That often wipes out the advantage.
Ah, right. We hear U.S. salaries are higher. How much higher?
Substantially. The average monthly salary after taxes in the U.S., it's around $3,360 USD. In Canada, it's closer to $2,400 USD.
Oof, that's almost $1,000 difference per month.
Yeah. Now, rents are generally lower in Canada. You might save, say, $3,800 to $4,800 a year on a one-bedroom apartment in a Canadian city center compared to a similar U.S. city.
So lower rent helps.
It helps, but often that nearly $1,000 monthly income gap means the American worker still ends up with more disposable cash, even with higher rent.
And this brings us to that Canadian paradox you mentioned.
Yeah.
Housing affordability. Even if rents are lower on average, buying a place, that's a different story, isn't it?
It's a completely different and, frankly, quite shocking story lately. Despite lower average rents, or maybe because of factors driving up prices, the major Canadian real estate markets have become dramatically less affordable relative to local incomes, much less affordable than big U.S. cities.
Less affordable than New York or L.A. How do we measure that?
There's the Oxford Economics Housing Affordability Index, the HAI. It basically compares median house prices to median household incomes. A higher number means it's less affordable.
Okay, so what are the numbers?
Get this. Vancouver's HAI is 1.71. Toronto is 1.56.
Wait, 1.71. Does that mean the median house costs 1.71 times the median annual income?
Yeah.
How does that compare to the U.S.?
Well, compare Vancouver's 1.71 to Los Angeles at 1.45, or even New York City, which includes Manhattan and the boroughs, coming in at 1.04.
Wow. So Vancouver and Toronto are significantly less affordable relative to local wages than L.A. or New York.
That's what the data shows. It suggests a massive disconnect between local earning power and housing costs in Canada's biggest cities. Lack of supply, maybe high demand from population growth, whatever the cause, it's priced locals out more severely than in comparable U.S. hubs.
That's genuinely surprising. I think the narrative is often the opposite.
It often is, and interestingly, the sources noted the second least affordable market in all of North America right after Vancouver. Boise, Idaho. Go figure.
Boise. Okay, that's an outlier. But the main point is the higher U.S. salary seems to keep pace with high U.S. housing costs better than lower Canadian salaries do in their major cities.
That seems to be the case. And then there's the daily stuff again, the sticker shock. Groceries, for instance.
More expensive in Canada.
Generally, yeah. Maybe 15–20% more overall. And dairy products. Thanks to Canada's supply management system, they can be up to 30% pricier.
30% more for milk and cheese? Ouch.
And gas prices, too. We're talking maybe $4.50 Canadian per gallon on average versus maybe $3.50 US dollars per gallon stateside. Those daily costs add up.
Okay, so taxes higher in Canada, cost of living maybe lower overall, but housing affordability worse in big cities, and daily goods more expensive. Let's pivot to the big Canadian advantage. Healthcare.
Right? Canada's universal, publicly funded Medicare covers essential stuff, no direct cost when you need care, assuming you're a resident. The U.S., famously a mixed, fragmented system, public programs like Medicare, Medicaid, but mostly private employer-based insurance or buying your own.
Financially, what's the bottom line for the average person, the savings?
It's huge, absolutely monumental. The average annual healthcare cost per person in the U.S. is estimated around $10,380 USD.
10 grand per person per year.
Yep. In Canada, it's about $5,000 USD, less than half.
Wow.
That saving is often the single biggest factor for people choosing Canada or accepting the higher taxes.
Absolutely. But here's where the data gets really, really interesting. I remember seeing this in sources, the counterintuitive fact about public spending.
Ah, yes. This blows people's minds. The U.S. government, just the government, through Medicare, Medicaid, VA, etc., already spends more public dollars per capita on healthcare than the entire Canadian government spends to cover its whole population.
Say that again. The U.S. public spend is higher.
That's what the figures showed. Looking back at comparative data, like from 2009, U.S. government health spending was about $3,795 USD per capita. Canada's total public spending for everyone, about $3,081 USD per capita.
So the U.S. government is spending enough public money to potentially fund universal care, but isn't getting it. Where's all that money going?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? It seems to get eaten up by a few key things. One is high private spending on top of the public spend. Another is market-based pricing, charging whatever the market will bear for drugs, procedures.
And the big one.
Administrative costs. The sheer complexity and inefficiency of the fragmented U.S. system. Some older estimates put U.S. administrative overhead as something like a 33.5% of total cost, compared to maybe 3% in Canada's single-payer type system.
33% versus 3% on admin. That's staggering.
It is. It suggests the U.S. pays more, both publicly and privately, for a system that leaves millions uninsured or underinsured and often yields worse overall health outcomes on some metrics.
So, Canada controls costs better, gets universal coverage. What's the trade-off? We hear about wait times.
That's the main one. The Canadian system manages demand essentially through scheduling, rationing via time, if you will. So while they do well on overall coverage and things like lower amenable mortality deaths preventable by good healthcare, the flip side is access speed.
How long are we talking?
Canadians are more likely to report longer waits for seeing specialists or getting non-emergency surgeries compared to insured Americans. The sources cited a median wait time in Canada of about 4.3 weeks for those kinds of non-urgent consultations or procedures.
4.3 weeks median wait. Okay, so it's a trade-off. Financial security and universal access in Canada versus potentially faster access for some things if you have good insurance in the U.S., but with huge financial risk for everyone.
That sums it up pretty well. Financial risk versus time risk.
Okay, let's shift gears again. Immigration. This seems like an area where the two countries are on totally different planets.
Oh, absolutely. Canada has been very aggressive in pursuing population growth, especially using non-permanent residents, NPRs, think temporary workers, international students, and their system is built for speed and predictability.
How fast?
Their main skilled worker system, Express Entry. They aim to process 80% of applications in about 6 months. Plus, they have provincial nominee programs, PNPs, that can give applicants a massive points boost, and a very clear path for international students to get work permits and then permanent residency. It's designed to be quick.
And the U.S. experience for, say, an employment-based immigrant.
It's the opposite of predictable or fast for many. Getting an employment-based green card can easily take 2 years, 5 years, even 10 years or more.
10 years.
And that's not the worst of it. If you're from a country with high demand, like India or China, because of rigid per-country quotas, you could be looking at wait times of 50 years. 50 or more for certain categories.
50 years, that's not immigration, that's a generational wait.
Pretty much. So for skilled workers who value knowing when they can settle down, Canada is just hands down the winner on predictability and speed.
But this high-volume approach in Canada, especially with the NPRs you mentioned, has it had knock-on effects? On the labor market? Maybe.
Absolutely. The sources highlight a really profound shift in the Canadian labor force, especially since around 2015. This big influx of NPRs has changed the profile of new workers.
How so?
They tend to be younger, often come with less prior work experience, and increasingly they're coming from a narrower group of lower-income countries. India is now the largest source country by a significant margin.
Okay, a younger, less experienced intake from different regions. What has that done to wages, particularly the gap between newcomers and Canadian-born workers?
It's had a major impact. The data shows the average nominal wage gap between NPRs and Canadian-born workers has more than doubled.
Doubled. From what to what?
Between 2006 and 2014, the gap was about minus 9.5%, meaning NPRs earned, on average, 9.5% less. But between 2023 and 2024, That gap widened dramatically to minus 22.6%.
Wow, from under 10% less to over 22% less? That's huge. Why is such a big jump? Is it discrimination?
The analysis suggests it's not primarily about discrimination. It's mostly explained by those changing characteristics we just talked about, the shift in source regions and lower levels of potential work experience among recent arrivals.
So bringing in large numbers of workers who might initially lack Canadian-specific credentials or experience, that pulls down the average wage for the whole group.
That seems to be the dynamic. Plus, you have a large pool of temporary workers who might be, understandably, more willing to accept lower wages initially as a pathway to permanent residency. It puts downward pressure on average wages for that NPR cohort. It's kind of a hidden cost or consequence of Canada's rapid growth strategy.
That's a really crucial point. It balances out the easy immigration narrative a bit. Okay, final section. Transportation. You called this the hidden killer earlier. Why?
Yeah, specifically the hidden cost in the U.S. Transportation is the fourth biggest annual expense for American consumers. We're talking an average of $12,295 USD per household in 2023.
$12,000 a year just on getting around.
Yep. And here's the really striking part. 93% of that spending goes towards owning and operating private cars. Cars, which, as we know, are depreciating assets.
So Americans might earn more, but they're forced to pour thousands into cars just to function.
That's often the reality. And it hits lower-income households hardest. The estimate suggests they might spend close to 30% of their after-tax income just on transportation. The national average is around 16%.
30%. Why is it so high and so car-dependent?
It's systemic. How U.S. cities were built. Think sprawling suburbs, single-family zoning, making density difficult, underfunded, or non-existent public transit in many places. It essentially designs car dependency into the system. Most households feel they need at least one, often two cars.
I could see that. Yeah. Trying to get by without a car in many U.S. cities feels almost impossible. Hard to get to work, buy groceries.
Exactly. It's a massive infrastructure and lifestyle cost that's baked in. Canadians, especially in larger cities with better transit, often avoid the worst of this.
How does it compare internationally, like Europe?
Big difference. In Europe, the average household spends maybe 11% of their income on transport. Why? Because policy actively supports public transit, walking, cycling. You see much higher rates of commuting via transit there, like 10-20% in Western Europe versus maybe 2% in the U.S.
Only 2% commute by transit in the U.S.
It shows the scale of car reliance. The source is even estimated potential savings. If U.S. cities adopted more compact planning, better transit, and embraced electrification, the average urban American could potentially save around $2,000 USD every single year by 2050.
$2,000 a year back in people's pockets. That would certainly help offset other costs.
Definitely. It highlights how much the U.S. model locks people into expensive private transportation.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground. Let's try to pull it all together. What's the final balance sheet look like? U.S. versus Canada.
Okay, the U.S. generally offers higher average salaries and lower costs on some daily items like groceries and gas. But you're facing much higher healthcare costs and financial risk, a very complex and often incredibly slow immigration system, and this really heavy, almost unavoidable cost burden from transportation due to car dependency.
Higher highs, maybe, but bigger risks and hidden costs.
Yeah.
And Canada.
Canada offers that predictability in immigration, faster processing times, and universal health care that removes the financial fear around getting sick. But the trade-offs are significant. A major housing affordability crisis in key cities that outstrips even expensive U.S. cities relative to local pay, generally higher income and sales taxes, and now this widening wage gap for recent temporary residents linked to the high volume of intake.
So every advantage seems to come with a pretty serious counterweight.
Exactly. There's no simple better here. It depends entirely on your priorities, your profession, your family situation, your tolerance for different kinds of risk.
Which leads us perfectly into our final thought for you, the listener, to consider. We talked about that really stunning healthcare fact.
Yeah, that the U.S. government's public spending per person on healthcare is already higher than Canada's total public spend for its universal system.
Right. And the big cost drivers seem to be administration and private market pricing. So here's the question. If the U.S. could somehow achieve Canadian levels of administrative efficiency in healthcare, the savings might actually be enough to cover every uninsured American. Thinking about everything we've discussed, salary, housing costs, healthcare access, immigration ease, daily expenses, what factor stands out to you as the biggest non-negotiable? What weighs heaviest when you balance higher individual earnings and spending against the costs and benefits of more collective public systems?
That's definitely something worth mulling over long after this deep dive ends.